Hi, and good morning to all the attendees. We are going to take a few minutes to let the other participants come in. So in the meantime, just sit back, relax, and we will begin shortly. Hi everyone and good morning. And welcome to EDIM webinar series part 2, Making Data Operations Easier. So the title of our event today is Making Data Operations Easier, Data Governance, Cataloging and Metadata. When creating a business-ready analytics foundation, many organizations are unaware of what data they actually have, where it resides, what processes use it, and how to stay compliant with current data-related laws and regulations. One of the key issues an organization must consider to overcome these issues is the cataloging of data. Organizations need to have a catalog of their data to provide information about its source, who owns it, the metadata mapped to its business context, and so on. When new data becomes available for users by integrated or replicated data sources, without proper catalog processes and up-to-date inventory, the data becomes difficult or impossible to know, trust, and use. Therefore, we thank you for coming for our webinar today in order for us to help you understand the process of cataloging as well as the in and outs of metadata, and who better to present all of this than our very own General Manager, Mr. Garrick Yap. I hand over the stage to Mr. Garrick. Thank you so much.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Jihan, for the introduction. Welcome to the second series of the Enterprise Data and Information Management webinar. Let me quickly share my screen. Okay, what I'll do is, give me a moment here. I'm going to turn on my video because for the sake of my Wi-Fi bandwidth, may take up a fair amount, and so I'll come back again shortly. All right, guys, good morning. Welcome to the second series of the webinar this morning. Our team essentially is to look at the overall data operations. We want to share in terms of the approaches and ways of how we can help to make data operations much more easier to handle. This morning's agenda will be focused on the second part of data governance, which is looking into the data cataloging and metadata management. Of course, there's more than that, which I'll come to it shortly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key values and business benefits of data governance. I'll drill into, before I drill into the data governance for data cataloging, metadata, data lineage, and so forth, I'll do a bit of recap in terms of what we've covered in the first webinar, right? Then we'll go into the glossary, the data lineage, the data cataloging, and what's all about. And I'll try to cut short the talking as much as possible. And then we'll skip over to Darren, who will be helping me to do a short demo on, just to give you a flavor in terms of what data governance look like and how the system helps in relation to the metadata management in terms of data cataloging and data lineage. Right. What's happening lately, right, within the industry, as well, within the region as well as globally? I think there is a tremendous demand for business analytics, advanced analytics, AI, and so forth, that actually requires applications and various types of data to be blended. They need to mash it around and for the lack of a better, for another word for integrating all these different data sources and different data types together to create some meaning out of this raw data that's in there, right? And most of the time the demand for such applications in terms of the analytics portions, of course, the business users, right? Data scientists as well, who has actually been tasked to come up with advanced algorithms in terms of predictive analytics, to drive prediction as well as to look at decision optimization, right? These people, they need data, right? They don't really care where it sits, right? They just want this data to come in. Most of the time, volume is there, and the variety is there as well, and they want to make, they want to put it all together to make some sense out of it. And the whole idea is to generate business insights so that the business user can use the information, right, to drive their strategies for, custom personalization, custom experience, right? Or up to the point of where they want to make the operations a little more efficient, more effective. So then this actually drives the importance of the data catalogs, right? The business glossaries, the metadata repositories, semantic layer, the data virtualization, right? Making data available regardless of where they're sitting at, and master data management. Now, you're probably wondering what this data catalog is about, business glossaries, metadata repositories, and so forth, right? Essentially, these are just information about data, right? What do they mean, what it's all about, what are the business terms that they put in, what are the data rules that has been actually binded to the data, right? And so forth. So I'll come to this portion later on. And we find that along the way, right, in terms of the with data integration becomes a high priority for most organizations, right? Whether it be in the ASEAN region or in the states and so forth. All this is coming in today quite at a very high velocity. So what we did was that we adopted some of the ideas from IBM, us being IBM business partner, within the, and this is the idea that we got from, their AI ladder, right? So I took a bit of an idea and repurposed it a little bit. Essentially, what we are actually looking at is helping our customers to go through a journey, right? Heading towards an AI-enabled organization. So the approach in terms of going towards that direction is actually a few steps. One is actually helping put in the approach and the strategy to collect data, right? And after the data is collected, right, irregardless whether they are structured data or semi-structured data or unstructured data, right, we want to put it all together and to collect them that is relevant to the business. And then after it's collected, right, we want to help them to manage the data, right? And when it is managed, we're talking about looking at the quality of the data, we're looking at the meaning of the data, putting semantics around it, right? And then once it's all done, then we actually put the applications in to help customers to analyze the data, right? This, like I said, these are the analysis portions where we derive business insights to complement their business strategies, their approaches, and whatnot, right? And then how do we operationalize the data, right? Moving it into AI applications, predictive analytics applications, and so forth. Now, the whole idea is to actually drive or to provide some of the key value propositions that the business will always look at, right? Especially in the pandemic, right? That we're looking at. So they're looking at drive business innovations, not just for fun, but they want to drive it successfully. And to drive business innovation successfully, you need information, business insights, right? Having said that, right, it also helps them to, of course, naturally to manage their business outcomes effectively with a very key focus in certain areas of the business that they want to leverage on, right? And this particular journey also, of course, ensure that the platform or the foundation that we're putting in or with the various approaches and strategies is to deliver data that is actually can be used by the business, right? They understand what it is, and they can readily use the data within the applications for advanced analytics and so forth, right? At the same time, right, not only about the business portion, the delivery, the business-ready data, focusing and managing business outcomes and innovation, they also have to ensure that the business continuity is continuously looked at, right? Suddenly, I mean, for example, when we first got, a lot of business was impacted when there was a lockdown and everybody had to work from home, you know, suddenly like, everyone is lost, right? They can't do very much because they don't have the kind of infrastructure to work off remotely, right? So they have to ensure that they can actually work wherever they are, as long as they can actually access the data and do their portion and do their business, right? So these are some of the key value propositions that we want to propagate to our customers insofar as this journey is concerned. Now, everything is riding on, for example, on a data architecture, right? Whether you want to run it, the whole thing on premise, on cloud, regardless of whatever cloud you want to run on, right? You want to ensure that the platform is readily agnostic to run on these different platforms, right? Whether you want to run a container-based platform with security or recovery, you know, everything is all taken care of. So it is flexible enough to be part of the overall data architecture. Right? The whole objective, right, is actually to help our customers to weave advanced analytics into the organization's data fabric, right? They do have a lot of information, I mean, a lot of data. It can be unstructured data sitting in folders and content management software or in Excel spreadsheets, right? In combination to those that they capture in their applications. So that's what's all about. And we started off the webinar series with managing your data, right? And the first series we covered, we shared a little bit in terms of data, understanding the data, right? We do the data assessment. We're looking at the different data anomalies. And having understood that, then we came up with you know, how to go about cleansing the data. So that was part one of it. Today, with the conclusion of the data managing your data in this journey, we're covering the governance and the way and I'll share with the way in terms of organizing the data. Right? Then we will cover the rest in subsequent webinars throughout this entire journey. Right. So as you know, right, data is the main thing meant to drive digital transformation as well as business innovation, right? And I think a lot of data is still being locked in silo, right? Yeah, they are very in raw format. They're not ready to be used by the business. So looking at the very research in terms of the, in this case is the AI data analytics research paper, you can see that 34% of those surveyed from over 100 countries with job titles ranging from CIO to Chief Data Officer, right, VP of IT or Head of Data Scientist and so forth, 34%, right, from their survey says that a lot of that time is spent in data operations, right? So that's a lot of time spent in terms of looking for data, understanding data, right, making meaning out of the data as well. Okay. So within the industry itself, I think a big chunk of it, I think 14% is coming in from the financial institutions. 20% I think is the other types of industries. Again, it's quite a fair bit. Within Asia Pacific, 28%, right, spent in the data ops. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, data is important because this is where you want to use it to drive revenue in terms of creating opportunities, upselling, cross-selling, right? Improving customer experience, analyzing customer behavior so that we can position the right product at the right time to sell to these customers, right? Having said that, they also want to look at how do we reduce costs, right? Can I go direct? Can I cut out the middleman, right? Stuff like that. And of course, the customer applications that the salespeople, the management people use, right? Can I get it anywhere, right? Or must I come back to office to access the information? So these are the things that they want flexibility, but then with the business objectives in place. So this kind of demands, right, in short, right, drove a lot of requests for machine learning. I'm sure you guys have heard about deep learning, predictive analytics, prescriptive, advanced, artificial intelligence, yeah, and all things coming in like data virtualization, data lake, data mart, data warehouse, everything, data, right? So all of this has a direct impact, as I mentioned, in terms of the creation of business value, and impacts the quality of the decision that's been made to drive their go-to-market strategy and the approach. So not going to beat this topic to death. Everyone's talking about this in every single webinar and everywhere that I see talk and the people that I speak to. So in short, basically here is that this particular pandemic through the virus has actually escalated tremendously in terms of the adoption of digitalization, right? Essentially, it actually sped the whole thing up by 5.3 years, according to IBM. There are many more studies, very similar findings as well, very similar conclusion as well, right? It's escalated tremendously, right? For the digitalization portion. But having said that, is what can be done, right, to complement the business? So this is the things that from a business perspective, right, these are the things that we're looking for. I want to understand, in this case, from a telco perspective, I want to look at my churn analysis. I want to understand why customers are running away, right? So competitors are giving better devices, offering more competitive packages, pricing, for example. Yeah. Apart from competition, what else are there? For example, they're not happy with service. And all this, what you see here, although as simple as it is, behind it are all the data that is actually making up for all this visualization, right? I want to understand my customer analysis. For example, who are my customers in terms of gender, in terms of age, right? What kind of products that they buy, what kind of services that they consume. They want to know because they're looking at target selling and positioning the right products and services with them, right? So they want to look at my profit, stuff like that. Again, all this stuff is behind this, all the data, business-ready data, and actually populating to all these different types of data visualization. Yeah. So now we're talking about predictive analytics. We are actually blending predictive analytics into business intelligence. For a very simple reason, right, is to make sense out of what this predictive analytics is talking about. So then combining it with what's happening now, or what happened yesterday, and also what's going to happen, right, within the next 3 months, within the next 6 months, right? So they can take, rather than a reactive action, they're taking proactive action to prevent, for example, in this case, revenue leakage, right, or customer loss, right? So these are things that we're looking at very closely today, okay? And these are all the different types of machine learning and deep learning algorithms that's been applied against the data to come up with all these different business insights, right? Now, what I just spoke about essentially is coming in from the data consumers, right? I want to have this. I want to know about my customers. How do I get the data I want information in terms of my past 6 months performance in terms of sales for this particular product. These are the guys who look for data. They are the ones who consume the data. And these are the guys who actually make use of the data to drive business strategies and approaches, right? So supporting this guy, right, are the one looking at the data quality analysts, right? Where are the data assets? Are the data raw enough that can it be used? Do I need to, what is the quality of the data? What are things that I need to do, right? To make sure that it is ready to be used and ready to consume by the business users, right? And then we have the data stewards, which is what I'm covering today, right? So if you look at the research, right, done by people like McKinsey or Data Warehouse Institute, a lot of the businesses today, they're spending a fair amount of time, right, looking for data, right, preparing data, getting the data ready for analysis. Whereas the enterprise, those organizations which really have a mature data management platform tend to spend, of course, in this particular study, 74% less time looking for data, understanding data. So there is a big difference and big gap here. So how do we close this gap? So this is another one by the Data Warehouse Institute. In terms of governance, so again, big percentage of users saying that, and predominantly these guys are the data consumers, right? They're saying that make it easy for them to look for data, to understand the data, right? And this is where the glossary comes in, right? The data catalog comes in, and the metadata repository comes in. And there are some closely behind it will be the data governance in terms of security and regulatory adherence, right? And somewhere down the line, you can see that it's also related. For example, what is the meaning of the data process? Different sources, right? And data lineage. So let me quickly recap on the previous seminar, right? Just to bring, as a preamble, to bring us to the data cataloging as well as the metadata management and data lineage. So essentially, we talk about what are the approaches that and ways that we can use to understand the data, or some part of data assessment, some part of data profiling, right? So looking at the overall data quality management framework, for example, we profile the data. We're looking at the column profiling, right? Then within a table, then we do table profiling. Of course, within the database, there are many tables. Across different applications, you can do cross-table profiling, looking at the relationships, right? And stuff like that. So after we understand what the kinds of data that we have been capturing, right? Then we can decide whether and how we want to clean the data or how to enhance the data, right? And this is where the concept of data parsing, correction, enhancement, standardization comes into play. Right? So, for example, in terms of from the data assessment, yeah, right? We're looking at what's the data quality score for, let's say, my customer file, right? My customer address, my customer IC number, right? My gender, and they look at all of this, right? And then within the system, the technology stuff is to ingest some AI inside there to look at inferred data classes, right? What are the business terms that it can actually detect, right? Rather than you going across one by one. Right? So, and the system comes up with all this data quality score, right? And it tells you where you are and what are those data elements that actually do not meet, that fail the business rules, which you can take corrective action if you want to. Right? So some of the things that we do is like, our IC number, some with dashes, some no dashes, some OIC number, your postal code, right? Is it all 5 digits? If is it not, is a combination of alphanumeric, for example, right? So stuff like this issue. All the data classes that automatically comes up with all these data insights for you, right? You don't need to actually go and sit down there and do a lot of programming to get all of this. So what you want is push it against the data and come up with all these different insights into profiling and assessment, right? So that was actually coming from the perspective of data quality analysts, right? So now let's talk about from a data steward perspective, how do we actually manage the data, right? So what essentially is general concept for data governance. The whole objective is to manage data within the organization, right? It is not an IT domain. It is actually a cross-functional management program, right? Essentially looking at data from enterprise perspective as an asset, and you want to have apply some corporate policies, standards, and processes, people, and technology to manage this particular enterprise asset, that is data, right? Another interpretation will be looking at the implementation of policies and procedures responsible to enforce rules of engagement, right? The word enforce is very scary sometimes because data governance is not about policing, like what do you call it, data police, right? Policing around, say who can use what. No, essentially it promotes collaboration, right? It is actually to promote data literacy among the users within the organization, rather than policing, all these things. Essentially, there are certain, of course, there are data rules that are binding to it. For example, sensitive data. Like, for example, you wouldn't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the organization to get access to your sensitive information like your IC number or your address, your policy number for the matter. So certain things will be, let's say, masked for security purposes, right? So essentially, why data governance? From a compliance perspective, we're looking at data privacy in terms of PDPA, data security, like I just mentioned, right? Other things will be more technical perspective in terms of improving data quality. I want to do my standardization, right, of my data, right? I may have different multiple applications that shares a common domain. So I may want to standardize it, or I may want to consolidate it. The documentation for the metadata management was all about the meaning of data within the data catalogs and how easy it is for the resources to be discovered by and make available to different users, right? Rather than calling IT or time, where is this and where is that? They can actually go in and look for it, right? And that subsequently translating to visualization for dashboards and so forth, right? Now, what you see here is a slide that I picked from Google. There are many different interpretations in terms of the business value that data governance bring, right? Essentially, it's about putting in trust and understanding of the organization's data, right? Another one is actually using a common definition of data to be used within the organizations for the analysis and whatnot, driving towards improving user experience, customer personalization, driving loyalty, and so forth, right? So everybody's using the same semantic or same language with the same understanding, right? And it also leads to improved data quality, right? Because remember, when data is, there are problems with data, there is a cost tagged to it to fix the data. That's why it's called decreasing the management cost, data management cost, right? So as you can see, there are many different ways of looking in terms of the business value, depending on which context you're coming from. So from a regulatory perspective, is of course to ensure that you comply with the governance, the regulatory rules and regulations as provided by the regulators, let's say in the financial industry, right? So that's, like I said, there are tons of definitions within the internet. I think if you want to look at the value, there are different ways of looking through, right? Some of the benefits in data governance, as I mentioned, making data consistent. For example, some users in one department will use the term called customer, right? Another department, maybe, right, from a sales perspective, they call it client, right? So you want to standardize and make it consistent, right? Do you refer it as a customer or do you refer it as a client? Now, why do I bring this example, right? Because I was involved in a project many, many years ago in AirAsia, right? We were doing dashboards in terms of the, from a sales perspective, actually. So one department was referring to the, as customer, and the customer service department referring to client, right? So there was actually a different type of interpretation from that. So I mean, ultimately, right, they remove the terminology like customer and client. Now, if you look at Asia, they call it guest, right? You're checking in as a guest. So This is where the understanding is and the consistency is very important. The other one is gross profit, the definition of gross profit. You coming in from a sales perspective or from a financial perspective, right? Within the financial year or the sales year, right? So gross profit is, as you all know, sales minus cost. So your revenue, your sales, cost. What kind of cost? Direct, you mean your direct cost, or you also include, for example, in some cases, my revenue minus my direct cost, also minus of the, they also considered commission that's been paid to the salesperson as a direct cost. So it's how you define, right, this various terminology. And then, of course, the second one is to, as I mentioned, data quality, very important, right? As simple as email, customer email, right, is important because nowadays, as I said, we are moving a lot towards the digital way of conducting business. We want to reach our customer, right? Send email, also through mobile as well. Yeah, we want to ensure that it's correct because then our reach, right, is maximum, right? Rather than a lot of rejected or incorrect email, for example. So that becomes data accuracy, completeness, and so forth. And all of this, right, has a direct impact in terms of the way we plan for the business, which naturally impacts the financial performance and the profits of the company. So there are 4 key dimensions of data governance, right? Encompassing data. There's the process, of course, the people, right? You interacting with the data. There's a process governing the data, the business, yeah, that requires data, and the technology, right, that is actually going to be used against the data to provide all these different insights. So from a people's perspective, essentially, is any individual, right, with an interest in terms of data quality, the security, privacy, standardization up to compliance, right? These guys are normally they are interested in terms of the business information, right? And technologies from internal, external to the organization. Predominantly will be key stakeholders, can be IT as well. On the business side, of course, compliance, if they are regulated industry, right? In terms of the driving efficiency from a government process, right? What kind of impact, like I mentioned, right, that you will have on the business, campaign management. If you're driving it from a digital perspective, the email, the customer information, the address becomes key. The processes against the data. What are the data policies that is being put into against the data, or buying against the data, the rules and data procedures, and what are the various processes, the management processes that can be used against the data. Right? And last is the technology. What kind of tools is available, right, to actually help the organization to actually implement governance, data governance activities, right? How do we actually help them to catalog the data, and how do we actually help them to manage the metadata, that's up to maybe modeling, quality, and how data can be easily discovered and accessed. So going into here, right, if you look at the diagram, the slide over here, right, from the enterprise data governance, right, this is hitting into the data quality, and we won't talk about consumption. We'll talk about later on. So the governance catalog, right, here, this is where the policy management come into play, the rules, the policy enforcement, right, the business glossary. I think Darren will be showing shortly in a while for the business terms, right? Then we talk about data lineage. So looking at, for example, gross profit, right? How do we calculate gross profit? Revenue minus cost, right? This is a formula. Revenue, the number come from where? Which table, which field? Cost, right? Where does it come from? From a combination of different data fields, different data tables, or different data sources. And what's the formula? What kind of transformation can apply against this particular formula? So it's now able to track back, right? Backwards to look at how and where this data was residing and how it was computed, right? I won't talk about the data quality because we covered that. Essentially looking at the overall data quality score to ensure that the data that we are using to compute, let's say gross profit, is trustable, is clean, right? It's correct, right? And the other one is the data discovery, where it allows the user to easily and quickly look for the data that they need for their computation or their analysis. So essentially, let's start off with data catalogs. It actually allows people within the organization to see what data is available, right? And that data is actually within the context of the business so that they understand what is meaning rather than a field name of a table, right? So it's like, oh, gross profit, customer, right? Or gross profit from financial year, gross profit from sales year, right? Customer, what is a customer, right? What is a customer agreement, right? So they can actually go look, and as long as they're given access, they can shop for the data. So it is manageable and it's secure. And of course, as I mentioned, access is controlled through the enterprise. And there are various policies that we apply against the data within the catalog. For example, if you're trying to get, if you don't have authority, you will not get the, let's say, IC number of a customer or insurance policy of a customer. It's likely to be masked, right? Because if you don't have the rights, you will not see it. So we're looking at the catalog foundation. Essentially here, we're looking at capturing the business language, very important, right? Not only in data governance, but the business language in, let's say, in the case of business intelligence for the matter, right? If you want to empower business users to create their reports, to create the dashboard, you cannot give them a layer of data that is actually coming in from raw format in table, in the fields that were defined in your table. You've got to give them a business context layer that actually they can understand. For example, gross profit, customer, product, yeah, subcategory, category. These are things that they can understand. So you must give them this particular layer so they can understand this. And then we define what are the responsibilities in terms of who are the people responsible to managing this particular data asset within the catalog, right? The ownership, right, and the domain, right? And what kind of classification that they're looking at. So, for example, a business term, as I mentioned, customer agreement channel. What does it mean? What is a customer agreement? What is a customer agreement type? What is a customer agreement number and status? So all of this is being documented and is being used in that business context. Right? So, of course, you can see here that earlier there's actually enabling the workflow. Essentially, that when I define this, it will go through some form of approval, right, process to get the data owners and whatnot to approve. So yeah, this is what it means. So this is the term, the business terms that you can set within the data catalog. And then there's a policies. What kind of data policy that you want to enforce, right? Against your agreement, against your IC number, your insurance policy number, or your credit card number, right? So you can define all these various data policies over here. And what are the governance rules, right? For example, IC number must be what, 12, how many characters long, or is alphanumeric, right? Or it cannot be null for that matter, right? So this is where you define all of this here. Another one must be a customer, right? Let's say, for example, in the insurance sector, a customer must be minimum 18 years old, right? So these are some of the rules that we can put in. And the data protection rule, for example, I want to mask all the IC number, I want to mask all the credit card number, I want to mask all the insurance policy numbers, for example. So you can apply all of this within the data catalog, right? And the data classes, right? What is the data class in terms of looking at the type of data? Of course, the system comes with some form of value matching, pattern matching as well, and a classification. So how sensitive is the data? and which classification you put into. And then, as I mentioned, the data lineage, which you'll see shortly in the demo. I won't talk too much about this. And then, of course, naturally, because you may have so much data in the company coming from different data sources. So this allows you to connect to different types of data sources to actually extract all your data coming into the repository to put into your data catalog and data discovery, different data classes, different business term, right? There is some AI-based detection to come up with some, suggestions that, hey, these two are actually related, for example. And the metadata import, rather than typing in one by one, I can actually import the metadata for those customers who already have implemented business intelligence, they have data model, right, or cube, whatever, then the system is able to import the metadata into the data catalog without having to retype everything in again. So that makes life a lot more easy. And these are all the different bridges that the system allows, or rather provides, to extract metadata from SQL Server, SSIS, Informatica, and so forth. We have a bunch of these. And then we have the metadata import for ETL. So it's very straightforward. Makes life a lot more easier. Okay. A lot of people ask, yeah, I understand what data governance is all about, but where do we start? Now, the reason I ask this question is because if you look at an organization, right, they already have, over the years, they've been collecting so much data, right? And suddenly they say, I want to do data governance. Right? It's a humongous task to do that. And, based on the what we have seen and what we have read, and by the various professionals like McKinsey, IBM, right, Forrester, right, and I tend to agree with them. There's no way, it will take you years, right, to apply data governance across the entire organization. The best way, right, to actually start data governance is actually based on a use case basis. For example, if you are looking to implement your predictive analytics in terms of cross-selling or upselling, let's say next product to buy. Now, to implement this, you need data for customer, for sales, right, for product, and so forth. So this is a use case, and it has a limited set of data requirements. So as you're implementing this, you are actually at the same time implementing the governance of the data, right, based on this particular use case, right? So once you're done, so what happens is that these are all, iterations by itself, and every time a sprint is completed, and you move on to the next sprint. Let's say, for example, now I will look at customer churn analytics. The good news is, when you look at the data requirements of churn analytics, customer sales pattern, product, service, suddenly is that you don't need to do as much in churn analytics. Reason being because you can actually reuse whatever that, chances that they will share the same, dimension, the business dimensions, and they probably share the same business metrics as well. So anything is adding new, with a new use case, you're adding in additional data, right, on top of what has been created in the governance area. So that is a better way of moving forward. And like I said, depending on what the use case are and which business we're looking at, chances are they share common business dimensions and business metrics. So you don't have to redo everything for every single use case. So this is the agile data governance implementation is a much more realistic way of helping customers to realize the implementation through multiple iteration. And for each iteration, you learn how to improve, right? That is the way of doing, one way of doing it. And then internally is to set up the data management office. This is where these people define the policies and standards and who they want to empower and so forth. Coming into from data council and so far, they are the one who review the strategies, what's the direction, right? and then the domain data leadership, right? Sales, customer, procurement, production, manufacturing, right? These are where they come in from domain. Right? So start off with limited scope, right? And then this actually allows for active collaboration with different business subject matters across the organization. So I mentioned it's more collaborative, right? Than more like data policing, as I said earlier, right? And doing this becomes a shorter duration. It deliver, the kind of functionality and business capability that's needed. And then, as I mentioned, you learn and improve from one iteration to another. So that's where these governance people, they are the bridge, right? And they bind the people behind the scenes who actually, these are the data architects. They are the guys who find data, to create the data pipelines, ingest the data, right? And the data governance people to look into how they will manage the data and then making that data available to the consumers of the data, like the business users, the data scientists, for the AI applications. Right. So I'm going to stop here, and I want to turn the floor over to Darren. He is actually going to do a quick demo to give you a taste of what the governance look like in terms of setting up the systems, the data lineage, and the metadata management. Yeah. So, Darren, over to you.
Thanks, Gary. Good morning, everyone. Give me a moment to share my screen. Okay, so let's get started by looking into one of the InfoSphere components, which called the InfoSphere Metadata Asset Manager, which is also known as IMAM. And this is where we can actually connect to the metadata data source. First, we will use IMAM to import the metadata. So from the import tab here, first to create a new import area, so click on the new import area button. So we can input a new import area name here. And below here is the list of types of the import tools that IMAM use either through InfoSphere Metadata Integration Bridge or through InfoSphere Information Server connectors, which imports metadata from various types of tools, files, and databases, which including, for example, like Amazon, Apache, IBM, InfoSphere Data Architect, MDM, and also, for example, like Oracle, SAP, so on and so forth. So for example, let's select one of the connectors. So I will select for IBM, and then ODBC connector. Okay, so we can actually browse through to select the existing data connections or create a new data connections to import the implemented data source, which including like database schema, tables from RDBMS, or any other ODBC supported data sources. So, and under the repository management, so this is where we can actually search, browse, merge, and export assets that are in the metadata repository. And last, the administration tab. So this is where we set import policy and also manage the metadata interchange servers where the bridges and connectors are installed. So next we will move on to IGC, which is Information Governance Catalog. First, we will start by creating a glossary development workflow. So we will create and update terms and categories, rules, policy as it needs to approve and then publish before they can be seen by the end user. So first we will log in as an administrator user. So go over to the administration page and then select workflow. Okay, so we can turn on and enable the workflow. So once it is enabled, we can assign the workflow roles such as editor, reviewer, approver, or publisher to the team members. So these roles are also represents sequential steps in the workflow process. At first, a glossary term must be created, edited, reviewed, approved, and then finally published before it can be available in the catalog. So next, we will proceed to create the governance artifacts. We will start by defining a category. So category is to divide and group the data information in an organization and make sure that it is being governed properly. So to create a category, so we can go over to glossary developments page. So and then from the glossary tab, we can choose to create a category. So we can type in the name of the category, for example, let's say a COVID mortgage analysis. Okay, so for this, we won't choose a parent category here because for this scenario, actually, it's just a top level. So I'm not going to choose one. So we also can put in a short description here. For example, like this category of artifacts are to be used for COVID-19 impact analysis on mortgage portfolio. So once completed, we can just click save and close. So next, we are going to create a business term. So same as category, go over to the glossary development, and then we can choose create term. For example, I'm going to create a sensitive term here. So we can select the parent category that we created earlier, which is COVID mortgage analysis, and then we can put in a short description. For example, like sensitive information identified in organization must be protected from unauthorized access. So we will leave the status as candidate as a data steward and proceed to click save and close. Okay, so we have created a category and a term. So next we will identify the policy and governance rules and what are the data rules and assets that are going to be linked to. So we can create a policy or a rule similar like how we create for category and business terms. Okay, so let's assume that we have created these policies. How do we actually enforce these policies? So we will enforce these policy through either through governance rule or data rules. So to review and approve all the drafted assets that we have actually created. So as an administrator or approval, so we can go over to the glossary under development here, select the draft assets. Okay, so all the assets that are pending for approval will be shown here. So navigate to the top right corner and click on the illuminate button here. So we could either discard, delete, or approve after we have reviewed on it. So the approver can proceed to approve it by clicking send for approval. Let's say I would like to approve this term. So an optional comment could be added as well. Okay, let's say I would like to connect one of the governance policy to the business term that I've created. So let's go back to the sensitive term that I had created. Okay, so from here, actually, we can see that this business term is governed by mass sensitive personal information governance rules, and then click on it. So, so this is governed by a referencing policy, which is protect personal information. Okay, so we have enforced the governance rule to the policy. So we could also create a data rule to check on the data violations of these data sets.
Darren, we don't see your screen. Okay.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, but in order to do that, we need to coordinate with the ETL or data quality team to link the created data rule to a policy, which I will show in the demonstration later. So this is a pretty simple option of glossary development workflow within IGC. So in IGC, so from the catalog page here, we could search for the metadata that we are interested by entering a glossary term name, phrase, or keywords. So by default, it is a business term. So, and then we can proceed to click on search to retrieve the search results. So let's take a look into all the category and terms that we have been created so far. So we can hover over to one of the assets, for example, the first one, and get a quick overview of it. So we can also search for a term that we are interested, for example, like value at risk. Okay, select the assets. And we can see more details like the business definitions, the descriptions, and structure to get a better understanding of how it is being used in an organization. So from here, we can see information such as parent category, data stewards, generate informations, and what are the associated terms or asset or assigned assets, collections, and we also can see there's a note that was added by the data stewards. So we could have a check with the data steward for any additional context if we have any further question about it. So besides that, okay, so we could also see the display graphical view of a defined relationship graph for the term. So from here, we can see that that there isn't any relationship type or has type has a synonym, but there are 5 related terms that relevant to these business terms. Okay, so now let's navigate back to the InfoSphere Information Server Launchpad. Okay, so click on the IGC new tile from the Launchpad. So an overview page will appear, so we can explore the catalog and search for the asset types that we are interested from the catalog tab here, and also can from the hierarchies, queries, or collections perspective. We could also establish connections to discover and import the data assets to the designated workspace and have a monitoring on the data curations and quality of the data sets. So we can also find the workspace under the quality tab. So let's click on one of the workspace and have a view of it. And click on the data sets link to the data sets links here. I will go into sales. So from here, we can see many information of the data sets. For example, like when the data was imported, quality score for the table, and also for each of the column as well. And also the infer or assign data class, term, formats, nullabilities, uniqueness, maximum, minimum values, distinct values. And we could also have an overview about the data quality, data classes, data type, rules, and also the infer candidate for primary and foreign keys. So how could we actually use IGC to create a custom rule for data analysis? So to create a data rule, so navigate back to the workspace from the breadcrumb menu here. So we click on the data rules tab. Okay, so we could either customize the preview or create a new rule to better understand about our data. So let's expand the publish rules section here. And then from the first personal identity sections and under age, so we can view all these pre-built data rules, and we can actually select one of it and then navigate all the way to the right to show the action menu and select the manage in workspace from the menu here. So once we selected, the rules will now appear under the all sections. So we can choose the edit options from here. And we can have more details about what is this rule about. And then under the rule logic, we can edit the rules based on the project requirements by editing the rule expressions at the bottom here. So we can also bind the rule to a specific column in our data sets. So let's click on the age variable name. Okay, so we can bind it to the age column in our data source on the right here. Okay, so let's assume everything's settled and we have published the rule. So navigate back to the workspace. Click on the data sets link. So from the rule tab here, we can see that the rule has successfully bind to the data source. So back to the data set from the breadcrumb menu here. So we can see that the data set is grayed out with a yellow little triangle here. So which indicates that the quality score needs to be re-evaluated because of the change in rule. So we can actually rerun the analysis for the data sets with this new rule, and the color will change from yellow to green to show that this analysis actually has been completed successfully without any errors. So last but not least, we will explore on data lineage of the assets. So let's navigate back to the IGC. Okay, so from the administration page here, so click on the lineage administrations, which is which is under the lineage management sections. Okay, so from here, actually, we can see what are the ETL jobs that are included for lineage monitoring. So click on one of the transformation project. So hover over to one of the jobs here, and then click on Open Data Lineage Viewer. We can run the lineage. Okay, so we can zoom in the data lineage. And from here, we could know the original data source, which is a database table. Okay, and understanding what happens to the data during the ETL processing. So we can, which is a parallel job, and then we can expand. Yeah, so we can look into the details by expanding to see how was it derived after various transformation and filtering. So it also can display the flow of data to and from the extensions, mapping documents, and ultimately generate a BI report. from multiple BI report queries and BI query items as well. So with data lineage, so it will help. It helps in the overall business intelligence infrastructures. So that wraps up my demonstration for today. Thanks, and I will pass the floor back to Garrick. Yeah, over to you, Garrick.
Yeah, thanks, Darren, for the demo. I will continue I will wrap up the presentation. So that was a short demo for data governance, right? Just to illustrate the idea in terms of how the glossary is maintained and managed, and how do we create the data catalogs, as well as the bringing in the metadata from, whether it's from source tables or source DB, or even from business intelligence applications, all the way to data lineage. So to summarize and to close off this morning's webinar, essentially what we're talking about from a governance perspective is that if you're an end user and you have questions about the data, right? So for example, where can I find this data? What does this data mean? How do you compute this particular measurement? Who should I contact if I have questions about the data, right? What is the definition of this particular piece of information that I'm dealing with? Are there any policies or are there any data rules that is actually being binded to them, right? For example, are the values that I'm seeing a report valid, right? And they can get all this information at their fingertips, as long, by going into, let's say, the data lineage, you can understand how it's computed, where's it coming from, which table, what are the attributes, right? And then all the way to, the definition of that particular piece of information and who is actually the data owner, right? Of the piece of information. So that's governance, bringing it all together. That's why I kept saying that governance is not so much a data police, but it's more to collaborative environment between various domains within the organization. So within our overall solution framework for the enterprise data and information management solutioning, where governance sits on is actually right in this whole area here, right? From your data integration, right? Going into what we talk about: assessment, profiling, data cleansing, enhancement, matching, right? To governance like data cataloging, metadata management, data lineage, right? This entire thing here, right? Some call it data management, some call it data fabric, right? It can be also, there are many words to it nowadays, right? Depending on which area you're coming from, right? From IBM perspective, they are coming in from a Taylor perspective. Look at fabric. Sorry, not IBM. Gartner was the one who came up with a term called data fabric, right? They're coming in from a Taylor perspective. Some coming from medical perspective, they call it data ontology, right? So you will hear a lot of these things, but they're more or less the same, right? So this entire layer over here, from governance to ETL and whatnot, is what we talk about essentially for the previous seminar and webinar and today's webinar, right? The whole idea is, like I said, to align the technical with the business, right? As transparently as possible, and to actually promote collaboration within the different business domains in the organization. So that will, what we just talked about briefly was essentially coming in from the data steward perspective. That this was this morning's webinar, and this is the first webinar from a month ago, right? So in the data governance areas, this is what we covered this morning, right? All this. And within the journey towards the AI-enabled organization, this webinar in conjunction with the previous webinar, will wrap up this part of the journey, right, insofar as data management, where we covered the data understanding, data cleansing, and data governance and data organization, right? The next webinar, we will talk about the collecting or gathering your data, right? How do we collect data that are structured, semi-structured, but a lot of focus, the next webinar will be more on how do we get unstructured data, right? This can be from the web, it can be from the enterprise content management, right? From different types of documents, and as well as data virtualization, right? So this will be done in the next webinar. And with this, right, essentially what we're doing is to come in from the data engineer's perspective, the next webinar. So this is where we talk about how do we actually create and manage different types of data pipelines. Now, having said that, right, this will, by next webinar, we will actually conclude on the discussion insofar of setting up the data foundation, right, for the data management or the data landscape, right, so that we can actually start to weave the advanced analytics into the organization's data fabric. So we will move on to this area later on. So hopefully by then we'll see that these two areas over here in terms of the analysis and operationalization of data will actually more concentrated on the business innovation, driving business outcomes, right? Especially these two areas. Then essentially the data landscape or data foundation is more to create delivering business ready data efficiently and quickly, right? As well as ensuring the continuity of the business. This will have a direct impact from the data architecture modernization, which will cover separately as well. So essentially, this concludes this morning's presentation for the data governance, and I will turn the floor back to Jihan. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Garrick, and thank you, Darren, for your insightful presentation on data governance and on metadata as well as cataloging. We thank all the attendees for coming today, and we would like to open the floor for a Q&A session. So feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box if you have any questions.
So while waiting for some questions, right, perhaps maybe I'll share a bit of perspective in terms of, again, not all companies will start to implement data governance from scratch. I think today, there are also a fair number of organizations that's already implemented, for example, business intelligence, which we've been doing for quite a while now. So part of the implementation for the business intelligence is, well, again, it depends how it's been, the methodology that is adopted to implement it. So I'm coming from our methodology, whereby when the data is actually extracted before being put into the visualization, we actually created a business layer, a business semantic layer, right, within the business intelligence application. Now, if you're coming from that particular perspective, if you were to contextualize the data into business semantics, then it will really cut short the data governance implementation for those who want to implement that within the organization, because the semantics are already created in the business layer in terms of empowering the business users to create the dashboards and reports, right? Again, another scenario would be they may not have contextualized the data into a business layer, but all is not lost. We can still import the metadata into the data catalog as what Darren has shown, regardless whether you are running on Power BI or ClickView or SAP Business Objects, you know. So we can bring it in, and then we can actually start to put context around the different data elements that is actually used in their dashboarding and reporting. So again, there are different scenarios to look at. There are ways to go about doing that to help cut short the implementation. So as I mentioned that, for those who want to drive on a use case perspective, once you put it in, then, like I said, most of the time they share similar dimensions, right? Customer, time, product, yeah, geographical location, salesperson, so forth. So generally, it will not, go off tangent very far. It'll be around that. So it will not be as humongous as one may think. So if you do it on an agile perspective, right, using short iterations from one sprint to another, this is easier to manage from that perspective.
Right, it looks like we don't have any other questions from our attendees. So I'm guessing we can wrap up our session today. Thank you, Gareth.
Yeah.
Thank you, Darren, and everyone for joining. Feel free to contact Garrick or anyone from our team if you have any further questions beyond this session. And thank you for coming and have a great weekend.
Thank you very much, everyone, for attending the webinar. Really appreciate it. Like what Jian said, have a fantastic weekend. And we will catch up again in the next webinar series. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.